This is part 2 of section 1.6. In these problems, we're supposed to find f plus g, f minus g, and so on up to part E and state the domain. So if f of x is x plus 2 and g of x is 1 minus x, we do want to know the domain of each piece before we use it. This is linear, so this domain will be negative infinity to positive infinity. Here, though, we're not allowed to take the square root of a negative number. So 1 minus x needs to be greater than or equal to 0 because in general, you can take the square root of 0. And this simplifies to 1 is greater than or equal to x. So this domain will be negative infinity to 1 with a bracket. Okay? So what this means is if I'm using these two with addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division, then my domain will be at least this restricted. I might have to add more restrictions, but it's at least going to be this small. So let's do A. Addition. F of x plus g of x will be x plus 2 plus the square root of 1 minus x. Now, we have not added any additional problems. We still have the same square root here, so I don't have to worry about changing what makes it negative. And nothing is added in complication here. So this domain is going to be from negative infinity to 1 inclusive. We are allowed to equal 1. Okay. Now for part B, subtraction. F of x minus g of x is going to be x plus 2 minus the square root of 1 minus x. And again, no additional issues, so the domain remains the same. Okay, for C, we want to multiply them, so f of x times g of x is x plus 2 times the square root of 1 minus x. They don't want you to do any simplification further than that. And all of this is still okay, and this will still have the same problems, so our domain remains the same. Okay, now for the division. Let's do f of x over g of x. So that gives me x plus 2 over the square root of 1 minus x. Now, we do have a new issue here. We still cannot take the square root of a negative number, so we still have at least this much of a restriction. But now, since this is in the denominator, I'm no longer allowed to equal 0. So if I'm not allowed to equal 0, then this just becomes 1 is greater than x. So now the domain is from negative infinity to 1, but with a parenthesis instead of a bracket. Now for E, this will be g of x over f of x. So that will be the square root of 1 minus x over x plus 2. We know the domain of the top, so it's at least going to be that restrictive. But down here, now we have to figure out what makes that 0, and that would be negative 2, so our x cannot equal negative 2. So this means I have negative infinity up to, I have a 1 and I have a negative 2 I need to take care of, so negative 2, parentheses, because we're not allowed to equal that, union, and then I can go from negative 2 up to 1, And since 1 is included, I have that. Now I can't go further up than that because 1 is the limit. I can't go any higher than 1 based on this alone. So this will be the overall domain. All right, let's do one more of these, or a version of it anyway, where this time we're only going to be asked to do the multiplication and the division. So a little bit shorter, but it does cause some issues. Let's talk about the domain of this before we go on. Okay, so I need the inside to be greater than or equal to 0. So our x has to be greater than or equal to 2. So that will be the square root, 2 to infinity. For this one, x plus 2 has to be greater than or equal to 0. So x has to be greater than or equal to -2, which would be -2 to infinity. Okay, we're going to be using both of these, and we have to make sure that any x value we pick works for both of them. And what we've got going on here is one of these is more restrictive than the other. This one allows the numbers from -2 up to 2, but also +2 and up. And this one is the most restrictive because all of this is included in this. So this right here is the primary one I know I'm going to be using a lot because this takes care of that as well. Okay, so let's find f times g. Well, that will be the square root of x minus 2 times the square root of x plus 2. That's generally how they're going to want you to leave your answer. You are allowed to multiply underneath square roots, in which case you would have a difference of squares and you can combine it and simplify it a little bit, but it's not getting you any further along. So there's no real reason to do that. Now, as far as the domain goes, we have the same two parts, and so they have the same two issues. Nothing has gone away, nothing has disappeared, which we'd still have to worry about it anyway, and nothing new has been created. So my domain is still going to be this most restrictive one. So from 2 up to infinity. Now let's do f over g. So that will be x minus 2 under the square root over x plus 2. Now we have this in the denominator, so we do have to consider again. So right here we allowed it to equal 0, but since it's in the denominator, x plus 2 needs to be strictly greater than 0, which means x needs to be strictly greater than -2. But that really didn't change anything because all the numbers from -2 up to +2 were already excluded from the domain. So even though this added a level of difficulty, it didn't change our domain.